Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Ichigo in a world of women in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 29, What a Turn of Events. The next day, Ichigo walked along the street to get to school, still not sure on what Kon and Kuroto were talking about last night. It was a good thing he told Kon to head off before him and he'll just catch up later. It didn't make sense to him. What exactly does his father have to do with any of this? Top it all off, his fight with Shina ended unceremoniously when he felt that spiritual pressure, but when he got there was nothing. This was starting to get on Ichigo's nerves and he had to find out what was going on sooner or later. Hey Ichigo. The familiar and cheerful Orium spoke up as she approached him. Ichigo turned and gave a small smile as he saw the girl. Hey Orium. How have you been? She smiled to him. I'm fine, just excited to get to know the new girl in our class. She took a thinking pose. What was her name again? Ichigo narrowed his eyes for a second before answering as he knew what new student she was talking about. You mean Shina? Orium snapped her finger in a eureka moment. Yep. That's her. I wonder if she would be okay with coming over to my place for a little get-together. Ichigo stiffened at that. Not really because of Orium inviting Shina to her place, mostly just because he knows a get-together at her place usually meant trying her off-the-wall cooking, and that was somewhat torturous enough. It was the fact that Ichigo had nearly forgotten about her after last night. Closing his eyes, he reached out and sensed her faintly high into the air. Stopping in his tracks, causing Orium to stop and turn back to him, he sighed before looking to the burnt orange-haired girl. Orium, could you do me a favor? He asked her with a small smirk. She nodded. Could you watch my body for me while I take care of something real quick? She hesitated for a bit before answering. Sure thing Ichigo, but what if somebody sees? Ichigo chuckled a bit before leaving his body. He grabbed under the arms and quickly took himself to a back corner, Orium right behind him all the way. Ichigo set himself down next to the wall. Don't worry. He reassured his friend. I trust you, Orium. He said to her as he kissed her forehead, causing her face to go beet red and for her to nearly faint from that sign of affection and trust. Ichigo shook his head and chuckled right before leaving the area in a shunpo, leaving the burnt orange-haired girl in her daze. Without wasting much time, Ichigo appeared in front of Shina as she stood there with that big smile on her face. She was in the standard school uniform, sans the red ribbon, and had her Zanpakuto sheathed in her hand. I think it's time we talked, Ichigo. She said, all the while keeping that big-toothed grin of hers. Oh. He started as he folded his arms and smirked to her. And just why exactly should I listen to you after you attacked me last night? Shina continued to grin at him in a slightly unsettling way. To Ichigo, this woman was clearly something else. She was a soul reaper, that much he could slightly tell from her Ryutsu, but she also felt like a hollow as well. That mask she showed him in their fight last night was no joke either. Despite her not fighting completely serious at the time, her strikes were nothing to slack off on. Ichigo still remembered how his arm felt every heavy vibration from the force she produced each time they clashed. It was an intense fight, one that he knew he could last just by sheer power alone, but probably not experience. Shina turned around and began to leave, surprising the teen. Come on Ichigo. She started as she turned her head, grin still on her face. Unless you're afraid. Ichigo narrowed his eyes and proceeded to follow her. As they used shunpo to get to their destination faster, Ichigo had a very sinking feeling in his gut that this day was going to become very complicated. Vizard Hideout, minutes later. After a short amount of time, both Shina and Ichigo landed in a docking yard. Ichigo looked around for a brief moment as he had never been to this part of Karakura town before. He was actually impressed at first, since something like this was never really a priority to him beforehand. Now, this was just another location he would need to remember just in case he ever needed to be here for any other reason. This way. Shina broke him from his thoughts as she walked on, Ichigo following behind. They passed by several warehouses, all of various looks. Some were nearly destroyed, most rusted from one end, and only a few that looked decent enough to use. As they walked on, Ichigo could feel spirit energy of some sorts a little ways off from them. It was faint, Almost impossible to detect, but there nonetheless. Shina stopped in front of one of the more dilapidated warehouse and stood there for a moment. Hanaka, Shina started. Drop the barrier and let me in. I have him. Ichigo narrowed his eyes for a moment before seeing a barrier of golden light appear visible to him. He smirked as he figured this was what he was sensing and watched as doorway opened up for them. Taking a breath, Ichigo followed her inside just as the barrier and the garage door closed, ensuring that he could not escape now. Oh joy, a trap I guess. Ichigo started in mild annoyance as he looked back to the closed door before feeling 7 new Ryotsu signatures above him. Turning quickly, Ichigo spotted all of them watching his every move, ready for an attack at a moment's notice. The first person he noticed was a fairly large woman wearing a lime green suit of sorts. She was holding her arms out for a brief moment as if she had just raised something up in the air and set it down. Her skin was slightly tanned and her short pink hair had some sort of symbol at the top that Ichigo couldn't see. Below her was another girl in a school uniform and glasses. She was leaning on a pillar with a book in one hand as she eyed Ichigo heavily, never lessening her gaze and just waiting for some moment or another. Next to her on the other side of the pillar in a crouching position was a short girl in a red tracksuit with the jacket opened up. Her dirty blonde hair was in a pigtails and seemed spiky slightly from what Ichigo could see. The next two were below them. One was a girl with bright green hair and a white outfit with orange accents and boots and gloves. She was leaning over a railing as she had a curious gaze on Ichigo. The woman next to her was leaned onto the rail with her arms folded under her impressive bust. She wore a gray tank top, beige baggy pants and combat boots. She also had on black gloves with a knife in one hand. Her shirt silver hair held back by a band to keep it from getting in her eyes. The last two were on the second to last level. One with long, curly blonde hair and wearing a black and white dress that went down to her calves. She held a knowing smile on her face as she eyed Ichigo with great curiosity. The last person was a woman in a light blue tracksuit and had her dark hair in an odd star shape. Ichigo couldn't get a good idea of her gaze because of the shades she was wearing, though he was wondering why wear shades in a semi-dark room. So this is the male we've been hearing about. The girl in the school uniform spoke up with a slight disgust in her voice. I'm not impressed. Ichigo raised a brow as he watched her turn towards her book to continue reading it. Was she underestimating him? Well, time to change that. Without even a second passing after she said that, Ichigo shunpoed to her and snatched her book from her hands before appearing back in the same spot as before. The girl reacted accordingly when she looked down to see Ichigo looking through her book. He raised a brow before looking back to her and noticing that she turned away in slight embarrassment. A yaoi? Really? He asked as he closed the book. The girl leapt down and quickly snatched the book from his grasp. She turned away and made her way back to her position, ignoring the jeering she heard from the curly blonde and the star-shaped brunette. Well, that was slightly impressive. The one with the knife started as she leapt down to get a better look at Ichigo. You seem tough. Care to prove that? She quickly got into a low stance as she held her knife in her right hand. Ichigo grabbed the handle to his blade and prepared for apparently another demonstration of his power to a mysterious group of women that most likely want his help for something. Now, Kenko, Shina started as she placed her hand on the knife-wielding woman's outstretched arm. I didn't bring him here just for us to kill him. Relax. The now-named Kenko sighed in annoyance as she relaxed her stance and walked away. Ichigo also relaxed as he let his Zanpakuto go and crossed his arms once more. So why exactly have you brought me here anyway? Shina grinned at his question as she looked to him, causing him to narrow his eyes to her. That's easy, Ichigo. We want you to join us. Nope. He answered just as quickly as she raised a brow to how fast he gave his answer. No. Yeah, no. Well, you mind telling us why? Shina's grin left her as she narrowed her eyes to the teen. She then noticed that he was entirely too calm right now. Cause I don't know any of you right now, obviously. Ichigo started as he shrugged his shoulders and looked to each individual. I can tell that all of you possess a hollow, but they're not as stable at all. He saw how everyone either narrowed or widened their eyes at his words, well except for the one with shades. He had no idea what she was doing. He continued as he looked at Shina. I don't know what y'all want my help for or why all of you are being pretty secretive about it, but I want no part of it. Now if you'll excuse me ladies, I should get back to school before I'm late. See ya. He turned away and began to walk towards the barrier, hoping that his words actually helped him in the long run. Last thing he really needed was another female group making his life even more complicated than it already was. First was the Soul Reapers, then these Arrancar that Koro told him about not too long ago, the Fullbring that he really should visit at some point this week, now these people. Things could literally not get any weirder for him at this point. At least that's what he hoped. Still needed to figure out what Kon and Kurodo were talking about his dad about. Wait. Shina started in a partially serious tone, causing the teen to stop in his tracks. Ichigo turned to her and folded his arms in front of his chest. Yes. The sheer smugness in his tone rubbed a few of the girls the wrong way, but they held themselves for now. Shina sighed and narrowed her eyes for a second. Kisuke hasn't told you about us, has she? Ichigo shook his head, causing Shina to give an annoyed sigh. Figures she wouldn't. Well, might as well get introductions out of the way now. Shina went over and stood in front of Ichigo. My name is Shina Hirako, former captain of Squad 5. That caught Ichigo by surprise as he raised a brow to her. You were a Soul Reaper. Shina nodded. We all were, until we had a little run-in with a certain woman and her associates that changed us into what is called a Vizard. Vizard? Ichigo asked with a raised brow. A Soul Reaper with hollow powers. Shina explained as she motioned him to follow her. Ichigo shrugged as he decided he had nothing really to lose. They went over to a staircase as the others appeared around the teen. Ichigo couldn't really tell whether or not they would become hostile or not, so he remained vigilant just in case. And who exactly was the one who did this to all you then? He asked, genuinely curious now. That bitch Aizen, that's who. The short blonde in the red tracksuit yelled out. That was a name that Ichigo remembered hearing briefly before. It took him a second before he remembered that it was Koro that told him a bit about her boss. If this Aizen woman was the one responsible for Shina and this group's condition and is the leader of the Arrancars like Koro told him, then he would have to tread carefully if she had her sights on him. Calm down, Hiri. The schoolgirl with the yaoi manga spoke in a bored tone. Can it Lisa? The now named Hiri yelled once more as she turned towards Lisa. That bitch ruined our lives, and even worse, those fucking Soul Reapers didn't do a damn thing about it. Ichigo perked when he heard that last statement. What are you talking about? Hiri didn't bother to answer him as she quickened her pace down the stairs. It didn't take long for the group to reach a familiar underground cavern. Ichigo scoffed a bit as he shook his head in near disbelief. Somehow he had a feeling that this warehouse was important enough to have a powerful barrier around it. Now then. Shina started as she drew her Zanpakuto. The rest of the Vizards leapt back a safe distance from the two to watch what would happen next. Ichigo narrowed his eyes towards her. Why don't ya show us all just what your hollow is like, Ichigo Kurosaki? Ichigo sighed once more and shook his head in irritation. He drew his blade and held it toward the blonde. Somehow I'm not so surprised that this would end in a fight of sorts. Chapter 30, Familiar Face. Ichigo had just left the Vizard warehouse after his fight with Shina. It didn't take them too long as she had Hanako make specialty barriers to allow the two to go all out in a sense. Ichigo wound up impressing them all when he showed them that he could actually manipulate parts of his body to be enhanced by his hollow. This surprised everyone, especially Hiri when she tried and failed to sneak attack from behind only for him to catch her blade with a pale white hand. It shocked everyone when he later revealed that his hollow and Zanpakuto were one in the same and they had a perfect synergy. Shina attempted to get Ichigo to join them once more to help them stop Aizen once and for all, but Ichigo refused, stating that if this Aizen woman was a threat, then he would be on the side stopping her anyway. This seemed to at least ease everyone's tension slightly and they allowed Ichigo to leave. For Ichigo, this whole Aizen situation was now starting to become a bit troublesome. First Koro showed up and spied on him on Aizen's orders for a few days, then there's this whole Vizard situation now. It seems that whatever Aizen was planning originally didn't account for Ichigo messing everything up. Oh well, in his opinion. For now, Ichigo still had the mystery pertaining to his dad and what Kon and Kurodo were talking about. Whatever it was must be something important indeed for them to sound so distraught like that. Should he just ask them what they were talking about? No. That would just make the two very uncomfortable in that situation. Maybe if he eavesdropped on them once more they'll slip up and say what was on their minds. No. That'll be too risky since he has no idea when they'll even bring up the whole situation again. What if he just cut his losses and asked his dad directly instead of just treading on eggshells now? A good idea, but his father could very well not reveal anything to him at all and act the same way he always does. Ichigo was stumped on how to proceed with all of this. Not only was everything in his Soul Reaper life starting to become a bit hectic, especially since he hasn't seen his girls in a while now, but now his personal life was being tested with his father's secret. Whatever it was, Ichigo would have to deal with it later on. As Ichigo was leaping through the rooftops after leaving the warehouse district, he felt something far off in the distance. It caused him to stop and look in the direction where he knew a park was, as it felt oddly similar to when he saw Grim Jane open that portal to leave before. Sighing at the thought of her once again coming here for a fight, Ichigo rushed off into the direction he knew the energy was coming from. Though, what he felt was familiar and made him smile slightly. This caused him to increase his speed so he could say hello to an old friend. Park. The Garganta had opened, revealing the two Espada assigned by Aizen to retrieve the strawberry. Yama was the first to step out as she had a large grin plastered on her face. So, she started as she looked around, fist on her hips. This is the world of the living. As she looked around, she noticed several human walking about and going on with their day like nothing was out of the ordinary. TCH. This seemed to irritate the large Aaron car as she gave a sickening grin. Oh well, might as well enjoy a meal while I'm here. Just as she was about to inhale as many souls as there were, a new voice from the Garganta stopped her dead in her tracks. Enough, Yama. Koro walked out of the Garganta, a stern look in her eyes as she looked to her companion. We didn't come here to cause havoc like you wanted. We came here to coerce Ichigo into joining us. The Garganta closed behind her, not entice him into a brawl. Ha! Yama laughed as she turned towards the fourth Espada. You sayin' that because it was what we were ordered to do, or because you just want you berry boy for another good fuckin'? Koro sent a hard glare at Yama that really was not as effective as she wanted since she was blushing heavily. It doesn't matter. She tried to recompose herself, and failed miserably. Lady Aizen doesn't want us to cause an unnecessary disturbance. Especially if it contributes to Ichigo not joining us. Yama started after she folded her arms under her large bust. So at least until he gets here, I'm curious about something, Koro. With a sigh, Koro answered after finally being able to control herself. What? Yama gave her a perverted grin. How good of a fuck was it when he nailed you? Koro's blush returned in full force as she just looked away from the large woman. Yama couldn't help but laugh her ass off at Koro's reaction. After she had returned looking completely and totally disheveled, both Yama and Grim Jane just couldn't get enough of teasing her for it. Koro would try to ignore them, but that proved difficult when they constantly kept reminding her of the best night of her life. It also didn't help that she had a little surprise waiting for Ichigo when he joins them in Las Noches. Their waiting wasn't long as Koro felt Ichigo's distinct energy racing towards them. She turned towards where it was coming from, excitement in her eyes at seeing him once more. Even Yama was taken aback by the sudden shift in Koro's attitude. To her, the pale fourth was always emotionless and even seemed dead to everything, then one night with their target and she's acting like a heart-struck schoolgirl. Yama didn't get it and apparently neither did anyone else. Ichigo was fast approaching and took notice of the two standing in a clearing filled with humans. One of them exercised his caution as he had never seen her before, but the other only brought him joy. He landed not too far away and began to walk over towards the two. Koro wasted no time as she ran towards him with teary eyes and a longing smile. She jumped over towards him, hands outstretched, and Ichigo caught her. Not even more than a few seconds after seeing each other and the two were already heavily making out. Yama was pretty surprised by what she was seeing, but at the same time, she had to admit that this guy was a stud among studs. Even from where she was standing, Yama could practically feel all those muscles through his clothes herself despite being nowhere near him. The way he twirled Koro lovingly was also unexpected as he continued to do so for several long seconds before setting her down. The moment he released his lips from hers and the completely flustered look in Koro's eyes was visible to the large woman, she could instantly tell that this Ichigo Kurosaki was the real deal. "I missed you," Koro whispered to him as she hugged his chest. Ichigo held her close to himself and smiled to her. "So did I. Yeah, no, I was little disappointed when you left my room without even saying goodbye." Koro did something Yama thought she'd never hear in her entire life. Something nobody in all of Las Noches, El Hueco Mundo, thought they would never hear from the stoic and emotionless Aaron Carr. Koro was giggling. Yama's jaw was completely on the floor when she heard that. Just how good was this Ichigo guy? Speaking of which, Ichigo looked towards the newest spiritual being he's met now. He grinned to her, causing the large woman to blush slightly and look away for a second. "So, who's your friend?" Koro looked to her companion, as she had completely forgotten that she was there, and then decided to attempt to regain her composure to answer his question. "This is Yama Largo, the 10th Espada." Ichigo nodded to her as he turned back to Yama. The two walked over towards the large woman as Ichigo still had his hand around Koro's shoulder. They stopped right in front of the still blushing Yama and Ichigo smiled to her, causing the blush to intensify. "It's nice to meet, Yama." Ichigo spoke in his usual lady killer tone that sent shiver up both women's spines. "Pretty sure you already know me, but what the hell, I'll introduce myself anyway. I'm Ichigo Kurosaki. You might have heard of me." Yama nodded as she tried to look tough in front of the strawberry. "Yeah, I heard of ya. Gotta say though, she looked him up and down with widening eyes, definitely better looking in person." Ichigo smirked to her. "Flattering, I'm liking you already." He took notice of Yama's intensified blush and chuckled under his breath. "So, what brings you lovely and beautiful ladies here? Did you come just to see little old me?" Koro melted right on the spot when he called her beautiful while Yama nearly fainted at his words herself. The two attempted to recompose themselves as he continued to chuckle at their reactions. As they tried to though, Ichigo could tell that they should probably take this conversation elsewhere, lest all three mess with the humans in this park. He picked up Koro bridal style, causing her to go starry-eyed, and looked to a jealous-looking Yama. "Follow me. Let's go somewhere a little more private, shall we?" He leapt into the air. Yama nodded furiously as she followed him through the sky, all the while still feeling an intense jealousy for Koro's position currently. "Oh yeah, I definitely want a taste of strawberry tonight." Chapter 31, Explanations and Fun. As Ichigo continued to leap through the air with Koro in his arms and Yama following very closely behind him, the entrance of the two Espada did not go unnoticed. Kisuke and Yoriyuki felt the two entering the park and decided to meet them face to face in order to assess the situation. Once they arrived though, they saw a rather interesting sight as Ichigo had also arrived and was twirling one of the Espada in his arms. The sight caused the two to grow jealous, especially Yoriyuki who hasn't gotten any from Ichigo in weeks now. It seemed like Ichigo had everything under control as the two didn't even bother to attack him, obviously too attracted to him to fight. Kisuke was about to drag Yoriyuki away from wanting to beat the pale woman off of her strawberry when suddenly the trio down below leapt into the air. Kisuke became curious as to just what was Ichigo's play here. He was indeed powerful and could easily take care of himself, but something just felt off to the dirty blonde. Something about that pale one in Ichigo's arms felt strange. It was the same feeling she got from Yoriyuki but much stronger and definitely more potent. It seemed stronger the more that Aaron Carr was near Ichigo. Just what in the world is going on nowadays with that boy? Kisuke asked herself as she watched them leave. Whatever it is, I doubt even Aizen will figure it out. Kisuke sighed as she had to hold Yoriyuki back from chasing the three down. No way was she going to let these two have a taste of her strawberry. As the group of three continued, Ichigo felt that both Kisuke and Yoriyuki weren't following them and was a bit disappointed to say the least. He hasn't really seen them around all too much for a while now and was starting to get a bit worried. Did they just not want to spend any time with him or were they busy with something? Whatever the case may be, he was sure he would find out sooner or later. After a few more minutes, Ichigo landed on a grassy plain about a mile away from town and set Koro down, much to her disappointment. Yama landed next to the two as Ichigo sat down next to a tree with Koro following not far behind. She sat next to his right side and snuggled into him as he placed his arm around her protectively. Ichigo looked up towards the much taller and muscular Espada and slowly patted the spot next to his left. Yama, seeing no reason to object to any of this, sat next to him rather quickly. So, he started, getting both of their attention. Just what exactly are you two doing here, besides to see me of course? Ichigo looked to Koro then Yama with smirk on his face as he knew the two were completely charmed by him. Yama was surprisingly the one to answer him, despite the apparent annoyance in her tone from having to discuss business now. Well, Aizen wants us to bring you in and have ya join us to fight the Soul Reapers. Ichigo raised a brow at what he was just told. Why would this Aizen woman want him to join her all-female group in order to fight against another female group and potentially just have sex with? Ichigo lowered his head as a large teardrop appeared behind. Well, I guess I just answered my own question. Koro saw his lowered head and raised a brow herself. Ichigo, are you alright? Yeah. He answered her while lifting his head back up and leaning back to rest on a tree. Somehow I'm not surprised why Aizen would want me to join her. Well, it's mainly so every one of us can fuck you for the most part. Yama said with a big-toothed grin. Ichigo narrowed his eyes at her for a second before sighing. Yeah, that figures. He looked back to Koro and saw her fidgeting under him a bit. What's wrong, Koro? He asked in a genuine tone but felt as if he already knew the answer judging from how she kept shifting her thighs around. And nothing. She quickly answered only to feel Ichigo gently grab her by the chin and tilt her head so her eyes were locked onto his. She blushed heavily as Ichigo looked deep into her eyes. Ichigo smiled to her. You can always tell me what's on your mind, Koro. He leaned forward and kissed her lips gently, causing Yama to become a little jealous herself. Koro leaned into his embrace and felt whole. Ever since that night of passion she had with Ichigo, she had felt like she was missing something. When she left his side without even saying goodbye to him, she felt as if the emptiness inside of her had grown. When she was with him, that emptiness wasn't even a factor, but the second she left, that emptiness returned twofold. Yama gritted her teeth as she saw just how well Ichigo was working Koro's lips so easily. She was starting to get pissed off at being left out of the action and decided not to just stand there anymore. Right as the two parted for much needed air, the tall Espada struck in a sense. She quickly grabbed Ichigo by his collar and pulled him into a bruising and sloppy kiss. Ichigo was surprised at first, but expected this to happen as Yama was practically seething every second he gave Koro all of the attention. He leaned into it and even slipped his hand into her coat to cop a feel on her muscular stomach. This caused her to moan slightly as Ichigo began to rub her surprisingly smooth skin. Yama gasped loudly as soon as he reached her breast, causing her mouth to open and Ichigo to dominate her tongue with ease. Koro for the most part was upset that Yama had just taken away her moment with Ichigo, but at the same time she was getting aroused by what she was seeing. Ichigo was working over the much larger woman with ease now and she was starting to feel hot and bothered from the sight. She was getting wet just from watching their interaction and she wanted more, right now. Ichigo felt his arm being pulled towards something warm and wet. He turned his attention towards Koro and saw she had his arm buried deep against her moist womanhood. He smirked as he knew exactly what these two wanted. And he was going to give it to them in spades. Las noches, Koro's room. While Koro was away along with Yama to bring Ichigo back with them, the sound of soft snores could be heard within the fourth Espada's room. Koro was usually a woman of rather Spartan-like taste when it came to her room. Everything was usually a stark white from the small, one-person bed to the singular drawer that held only the bare necessities for someone to live with. Everything about her personality was shown in her room, which held just as much of a personality as she did, none. But that was before she met Ichigo Kurosaki, the only male soul in the spiritual worlds. Her room was now a bit of a mess with her now much larger, queen-sized mattress having many stains from sleepless nights ever present. The shelves on the drawer being strewn about all over the room, clothes laying everywhere, and the sheets for said bed bundled up at the foot of the bed itself. This is where the soft snores could be heard from. Lying there, sleeping peacefully as can be, was a baby girl of sorts. Her skin was slightly paled with a slight tanned color to her, black fingernails upon her hands that were gripping the sheets around her, and the most unique feature of all, dark orange hair atop her head. hair that went just past her ears and smoothed it out. The little girl continued to sleep, enjoying the quietness of the room and the calmness in her soul. Until a faint energy began to resonate with around her. The energy was black with wisps of dark green and red around it. The energy continued to encase her slowly and steadily rose with each passing minute. The energy began to flare about within the room, causing a bit of a strong breeze to whirl inside the room. This continued on as the energy seeped inside of the baby girl for over an hour, until it finally died down and stopped suddenly. Once it did, the energy encasing the baby girl broke away to reveal a child no older than 5 or 6, laying there in the bed. Her skin had a bit more of a tan while still having a pale shine, her dark orange hair reached all the way to her hips, and when she opened her eyes, they were a deep chocolate color. The girl slowly sat up, grabbing the sheets to cover her nude and petite form, before looking around the room in confusion. She knows this place, but does not know where they were. She opened her mouth to speak, and could only say a few words. Mommy? Daddy? Chapter 32, Yuzuki's Day in Las Noches. Limes. Las Noches, Quoro's room. Mommy. The little girl started as she looked around the room with confused eyes. Papa. She continued to look around the room, half expecting for someone to answer her, only for there to be silence. She stood up on her own 2 feet as she continued to look around the room. It was very Spartan-like as it was drab and plain aside from the large mess. The girl decided to walk around the room for a bit to get a good look around, only for her to stumble and fall flat on the ground. If it wasn't for the rather large blanket covering her, she would have landed badly on the hard floor. The little girl stood up on now shaky legs and began to walk around the room. There was really nothing too interesting or special in her eyes aside from the bed where Quoro slept, and that was when she noticed the door to the room was slightly open. Smiling to herself, the little girl walked over to the door only to realize that she was not wearing anything. Looking around rather briefly, the little girl decided to use the blanket as a makeshift dress for now. Her black fingernails extended a few inches and sharpened like knives as she cut a few holes in the fabric. The holes were big enough for her arms and head to stick out of. The last thing she grabbed to make this all complete was to rip out a part of a sheet on the bed to tie around her waist so that her makeshift dress was complete. Smiling at her success, the little girl left the room and began to walk down the long, white corridors of Las Noches. There was really nothing of note with the place as everything looked the same as before. She hummed to herself as she continued to walk on, searching for her parents in this place. After a few minutes of aimless walking, the little girl heard a few voices not too far off down the hallway. Picking up her pace, she saw 3 women, and 2 of them were essentially just shouting at each other about something. One of these women had blue hair and 2 different colored eyes, while the other one that was shouting was tall with dark skin and long brown hair. The one that wasn't saying much of anything had olive green hair and kept half of her face covered for some reason. I'm telling you that Lady Halibel has no interest in this male Soul Reaper Cowtits. The blue-haired one yelled at the taller woman, clearly angered about something. And I'm telling you that you don't know a damn thing about Lady Halibel's interest, you shrimp. The taller one retorted. All I'm saying is that Lady Halibel may want to find this man to pleasure herself for once, since apparently you're so damn terrible at it. The blue-haired one gritted her teeth in anger. Huh? You think I can't please her any better than this man could? Like you could do any better. I most certainly could. And I most certainly have done better than you. The 2 butted heads as they were about to begin shouting at one another once more, until the third one spoke up for the first time. I say we just bring this man here and find out for ourselves if he can provide Lady Halibel the pleasure you 2 seem to fail so miserably at doing. Shut up, Sung Sung. They both yelled out to her as Sung Sung turned and left with a chuckle under her breath. The 2 stared each other down once more before leaving the area. Papa. The girl spoke up as she gained a look of determination to find who she knew they were talking about. That probably meant that he wasn't here in this place if those 2 were talking about bringing him here for someone else. The girl walked on, hoping that she could figure out just where her papa was at the moment. It actually didn't take her long to stumble upon a sight that was probably a little too much for her young eyes. She stumbled upon a slightly opened door down the hallway and heard noises coming from it. You like that, Don Shaw? A voice came from the room as the little girl peered inside and immediately was stunned by what she saw. There was a very tall and skinny woman with long black hair and an eye patch holding another woman with dirty blonde up against a wall by the back of her neck. The woman with blonde hair was completely nude and her face was nearly beet red from being choked, but the look on her face was one of intense pleasure as the tall woman was shoving one of her long arms into her. The woman on the wall was completely naked from the waist down and seemed to be enjoying herself while the taller one continued moving her arm in and out of her. "Admit that you like Tesla, you fucking slut." The taller one began as the now named Tesla could only wheeze out in short breaths while her tongue was hanging out her mouth. "That's a good slut. You better fucking gush for me. Fucking gush for me, Tesla. Do not keep me waiting, Tesla." The taller one screamed out and seemed to squeeze Tesla's throat harder, causing her to roll her eyes to the back of her head. The tall one's arm became a blur as she moved in and out of Tesla faster and faster until the dirty blonde sprayed her juices out in a torrent on the tall one's arm. The dominant woman grinned as she quickly removed her arm, lifted Tesla high against the wall so her gushing womanhood was directly in her face, and opened her mouth wide to catch as much of the woman's juice as possible. It took a few minutes but eventually Tesla stopped and spasmed hard as the tall woman loosened her grip on her neck and swallowed as much of her juice that was in her mouth. When she finished, she grinned as she dropped Tesla hard onto the ground. Tesla took in long and deep gasp of air as a large bruise in the shape of a hand was formed on her neck. "Good girl, Tesla." The tall one started as Tesla was still regaining her breath. She began to undo her own pants and let them fall to the ground to reveal she wasn't wearing anything underneath. Her own womanhood dripping wet in anticipation. "Now get over her and show me how much of a slut you really are." Tesla, hearing what was told to her, crawled over to the woman, tongue still handing out, and began to get to work eating her out. "Thank you, Mistress Neutra." Tesla spoke in between licks. The little girl slowly walked away from the door and quickly left the scene as it was a bit too much for her to process. There were so many questions going on inside her head at the moment. Like why someone would enjoy being choked like that, or why was that Neutra woman was so incredibly tall. Those little thoughts popped into her head until she heard more voices down another hallway. She was so deep in thought that she failed to realize that there was an adjacent hallway now. She turned down this new hallway and walked down to where she knew the voices were and could hear moans of some kind. She walked on until she rounded a corner and saw a woman with blue hair sitting next to the wall with her clothes scattered everywhere and fingering herself, hard. "God damn it," she mumbled to herself. "I want that berry so fucking badly." She breathed out heavily as she used her free left hand to fondle her breast as she pumped her fingers faster into her moist hole. She squirmed as she continued pleasuring herself and continued talking to herself as well. "Damn you, Koro, for showing us all that shit you two did. It should have been me, oh." She arched up her back and went faster. "Oh shit." She gritted her teeth and came hard right in the hallway, spraying all the way to other wall in total euphoria. When she finished, she fell to ground and panted heavily. "Fuck." She panted out. "Wish I was in the world of the living now again to jump Barry Boy's big ass dick instead of those two bitches." The little girl heard her say that and now knew exactly where to go. She turned away from the blue-haired woman and left just as a tall and muscular woman with red hair parted to the side came over. Grim Jane. What are you doing?" Grim Jane simply looked up to her blushing Fraxion and grew a tick mark. "Thinking of getting plowed by Ichigo. Why the hell else would I be sprawled out like this in the middle of the fucking hallway?" Chapter 33, Parentage. Back in Karakura town. Ichigo was steadily putting his Hakuma back on as he felt sore from the waist down. While he absolutely enjoyed his time with both Yama and Koro, he realized way too late that one of these two was much heavier than the other. It didn't help that she loved riding him for all he was worth at the time and didn't really allow him to take control too often. Yama was indeed a stamina freak, lasting longer than Koro did at the time. Ichigo lost track of time with these two as they each seemed to try and outdo each other in a sense. Yes, Yama won in the end by one last shot as compared to Koro before passing out onto the grassy plain. Right now, though, it was well into the nighttime and Ichigo stretched himself out, trying to get feeling back into his legs and hips. Arrancar women were a whole other beast than Soul Reaper women for the teen. He had to guess that it was just their natural instincts to dominate in fights and in sex, but he was also a pretty dominant guy himself. He breathed in deeply as he looked towards the starry night sky before looking down to the two beauties sprawled on the ground. Both satisfied and peaceful. He made sure to cover them up as much as possible with their own clothing, or in Yama's case the shredded remains of her clothes, before he got dressed himself. The teen smirked at the two before looking out towards the city, contempt on his day so far. I guess I should head on to Kisuk's shop, let her know what's going on. He thought to himself as he was about to get ready to head out. While he knew leaving the two out here wasn't the right thing to do, he also knew that if this Aizen woman wanted him to join her in destroying the Soul Society, then he would have to let someone know. Looking back to Koro and Yama one last time, he couldn't help but smile to them. He turned away and leapt high into the air. Today was a good day for the teen as he continued to leap through the skies of Karakura town. He couldn't help but have the same smile essentially plastered on his face as he made his way over to Kisuk's shop. Sure, he could just use Shunpo, but he wanted to take the time to enjoy the night sky for a bit. Nothing was gonna take the smile off of his face, until he felt a Garganta open up above him. What now? The teen stopped and looked up to see the small Garganta open and something small came out. He narrowed his eyes as the Garganta closed on itself and the figure was free falling towards him. Ichigo could barely make out just what this hollow was, but he definitely noticed that it looked like a small child of sorts. What the hell? He said more to himself than anything as the small figure began to yell out in the air. Daddy! Wait a minute, Ichigo started as he tilted his head to make sure he heard correctly. Daddy! Oh no! He started as he realized just what this little girl from the sound of her voice said. Daddy! Ichigo freaked out a bit as his eyes went wide at the fact of what this little girl was implying. Sure, he's had sex with multiple women already, but there was no way he could actually have a child with one of them, right? Daddy! Right? Daddy! Oh, screw it. Ichigo leapt up high in the air and met the little girl halfway. She immediately latched onto him in a tight hug while he held onto her gently. I finally found Daddy. She spoke as she continued to nuzzle into the crook of his neck. Ichigo couldn't help but smile at her. As he got a good look at her, he noticed that she shared characteristics to Koro as well as himself. Seeing that, he remembered that Koro wanted to tell him something before they made love on the hill. Was she what Koro wanted to tell me about? Ichigo thought to himself as he managed to detach the girl from him and get a good look at her face. She had the same eyes as him, that chocolate brown color everyone recognized as his own, and her face resembled Koro's so much it was practically a no-brainer who the mother was. I guess I'm a father now. Ichigo smiled to her as the thought did always cross his mind of being a dad later on in life. It wouldn't be hard since he had so many women to choose from, but he did wish he was a bit older before taking on such a responsibility. The thought of being a father with Koro made him think of the other girls he's been with. Kenpei, Kyokaku, Yoriyuki, Swyfon, Rukia, Renka, Akuko, Yumichika, Rangiku, Isane, Nimue, and Yama. Did this mean that all of them were pregnant too? Daddy! The little girl in his arms tilted her head when she noticed a faraway look in his eyes. Ichigo refocused and smiled back at her, causing her to smile. And what is your name, little miss? The girl continued to smile as she answered him. I'm Yuzuki. Yuzuki, Ichigo started, what a beautiful name for beautiful kid. She smiled and hugged him once more. Ichigo returned it as he thought of just who to talk to in this situation, though she was at the moment laying nude on a hill right now. Smirking to himself, Ichigo pulled Yuzuki away to look her in the eyes before speaking. Let's go find your mother, Yuzuki. Yuzuki's smile was so large that it looked like it would split her face open. She nodded as she pointed off in the direction Koro was in. Mommy is that way. A black and red energy came out of her finger in a line of sorts and made a beeline for Koro, surprising Ichigo. He noticed that it was very similar to his own energy. Made sense to him since she's his daughter, so he shrugged it off and held her tightly. Hold on. She did so with the same smile as Ichigo used his own speed to reach an awakened Koro and a still unconscious Yama on the hill. The moment Koro saw Ichigo, she smiled to him, but then she noticed the child waving at her and blushed a bit at her own attire. Well, more like lack thereof. Quickly finding her coat, Koro covered herself up before walking over to the two. Sorry to leave you like that. Ichigo started as she made her way to them. You two were passed out, so I figured this was for the best. Koro smiled and kissed him as soon as she was close. It's alright. Mommy. Yuzuki started as she let go of Ichigo and leapt toward Koro. Koro caught her and was instantly in a deep hug from the girl. She returned it much to Ichigo's delight, yet he saw a look of confusion in her eyes. What's wrong? I thought you wanted to tell me about Yuzuki to start with. It's not just that. Koro loosened Yuzuki's grip so they both could get a good look at her. It's just when I left her in my room, she was only a baby. A baby? This caught Ichigo off guard. Yes. Koro looked back to Ichigo with a slight smirk. It seems that Arrancar children age faster in a sense. Ichigo smiled back at her and leaned over to kiss her again. I guess so. He turned to the smiling Yuzuki. Man, this is gonna be a weird conversation with my dad. The two chuckled for a bit before Yama suddenly woke up with a jolt as she sat up quickly. She had a completely dazed look in her eyes as she shook her head to refocus. Noticing the three next to her, Yama saw the kid in Koro's arms and held a look of both confusion and a slight anger. Damn it all, she started as she scratched the back of her head. Now I want a kid all of a sudden. This, in turn, had Yuzuki laughing, which caused Ichigo to laugh as well. Koro simply giggled under her breath at her comrades sulking. Check the description for the links to the author.